This week on Hatter or Lower, we are joined by yet another very special guest. A warm welcome to the podcast. One half of the Price of Football podcast, quite possibly one of the best football financial experts on the planet. He's a freak in the Excel sheets. It's Kieran Maguire. How are you doing, Kieran?
I'm very honoured to be on the show. What a welcome! You've got the cheap half of the Price of Football presenters. I'm looking forward to this very much.
Yeah, we couldn't afford Kevin. But I love your podcast. It's one of the few podcasts that I actually listen to. How did you and Kevin Day go about setting up the greatest football podcast that you both maintain is nothing to do about football?
It's one of those sort of sliding doors moments. I used to do quite a lot of work. In fact, I still do a lot of work for broadcasters on football finance stories. And one of the shows I used to appear on a regular basis was Radio 5's Wake Up to Money. And I'm such an irritatingly morning person that I would drive into the BBC studios in Salford for a show which starts at 5:15 in the morning for what was normally a 2 or 3 minute interview, whereas other people would just phone it in. So I got to know some of the guys there, and one of their presenters, Guy Kilty, he wanted to set up his own podcast company, and he pitched to me a football finance podcast. To which my reply was, "There's not going to be enough material, and me talking about football finance won't work. It's because I'm a teacher, and it just becomes too much like a lecture." So we therefore decided we needed to find an alternative, have it more conversational. If you've the infinite monkey cage with an academic and a comedian, that seems to work with Brian Cox and Robin Ince. So could we do something similar? At the time, I was living in Manchester, so we were going to go for a Manchester-based comedian. We were going to approach Justin Morehouse, but I was also going through a bit of a midlife crisis, and I decided that I wanted to move back to Brighton, even though I'd lived in Manchester for 40 years. And therefore, working with Justin wouldn't have worked as well. And I remember Kevin from Luton have had those horrible days in the club's history. Brighton have had horrible days. And I remember back in the mid-90s, Brighton were bust, and they were trying to raise money by hook or by crook. And this Palace supporting comedian, Kevin Day, came down and did a benefit gig for Brighton for fundraising. And none of our fan base have ever forgotten that. We hate Palace, Palace hate us, but we've always sort of taken it as, actually, you hate Watford, but you wouldn't want Watford to go out of business. You want to see them struggle. You want to see their centre forward in the Sunday papers with a donkey, a vat full of custard, a few lines of cocaine. That's what we want as rivals. But in order to have a rivalry, you have to have rivals. So Kevin had done this for us, and I just thought, wait, he sounds like a decent guy with decent values. So I pitched to him on Twitter, and he thought it was a really stupid idea, but he's too polite to turn it down. So we met up, we did the show, and we're now with 500 shows plus 16 million downloads, whatever. Yeah, the numbers are ridiculous.
You wouldn't have thought that a show about football finances would fly that much.
No, but in fact, we still don't. I'm a failed accountant. As they say, those that can do and those that can't teach, and those that can't teach football finance. That's my position. So I'm this sort of. I'm fully aware that I'm a social misfit and an outsider, and I'm having the time of my life. I've never enjoyed work as much as working with Kevin and Guy.
It's amazing. Every time I pick up my dad and we go to football, I always say to him, because he's been an accountant for 50 years, 50 plus years. I say, you have to listen to this podcast. It's a footballing accountant. You'll absolutely love it. And he always gets into it. He always does. It's absolutely tremendous. It's without doubt one of my favorite podcasts. I absolutely love it. And I don't really have that much of a financial brain, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much. We try to sort of go back to the Reithian principles of educate, inform, and entertain. And I'm the educator. Kevin's the entertainer, and between us, we try to inform. So it's worked, I guess, on that basis. And from what I understand, it's listened to at an awful lot of clubs, mainly because Watford appear in it quite often, and not normally in a very positive way. So I can imagine Gary Sweet and the rest of the Luton board sitting there sniggering away as I destroy the logic and the legitimacy of the share issue which Watford tried to have recently in terms of the digital benefits of being a digital share owner of a football club.
The way you rationalised that was fantastic. You said it's like going to a buffet. No, it's like going to a fancy dinner and ordering and then just leaving before you actually eat. Tremendous. Yes. And a rule of thumb is, if you appear on the Price of Football, it's not a good thing.
If you appear once every 6 months, that's fine. If you appear once every month, you are Southend or Morecambe or some of these clubs that are going through crises. Yes, I think it's fair comment.
There was a time when Southend were on every week. But regardless, we're here to talk about Luton Town and what a tremendous job we do, as you always mention. So you say Luton Town are the best run club in the Championship, possibly in the entire league, across the Football League. In your professional opinion, why is that?
I have we have a listeners' questions episode each week, and that was one of the questions, and I unequivocally said, Luton Town. Or in fact, it was the Second Tier podcast.
Yeah.
In my view, it's a club which knows its limits, lives within its limits, has ambition in terms of the move to the new stadium. As far as the progression from non-league to Premier League, and that's what the club has had to go through, I think that has been extremely well managed. And on the back of that, the club has a success on the pitch without ever, under the current regime, putting the club into a position where they had to get promoted or the boys were coming around, to challenge, the club's ability to continue to trade. So I think, given the problems that the club had, 30 years ago, lessons have been not only learnt but remembered, and too often lessons are learnt at the time, and then within 2 or 3 years you've got the fans screaming at the owners to spend, speculate to accumulate, and so on. My impression of the people in charge of Luton Town is, they ignore that section of the fan base which comes out with those comments, and every fan base having it is not a criticism of Club X versus Club Y. It's the way that we are geared as people to think that spending more money, especially if it's somebody else's money, is a solution to a problem. So I admire the way that the budget is set, the way that the budget is maintained and adhered to, that they don't cave in. And I just think it's on the back of that, the results, which I've got the accounts here in front of me. Did the club lose money in getting promoted? Well, yes, it did, but Luton lost £16 million in 22-23. Of that £16 million, 3/4 of that was promotion bonuses. So had they not been promoted, they would have probably lost somewhere in the region of £4 to £5 million. You might say, well, that's a lot of money. By Championship standards, it's not. The average losses in the Championship are £400,000 a week, and you've got a long line of. They're not bad people. I think they're more mad people who are just subsidising clubs to that extent. But it only needs a change of circumstance. We saw with Chelsea what happened to Abramovich. He'd subsidised Chelsea 900 grand a week for 19 years. If the owner's circumstances change, what happens if, terrible thing, if the owner dies? We saw Trevor Hemmings at Preston, thinking a Championship club. He sadly passed away. John Berylson at Luton Town. He was tragically died last year.
And Millwall.
Sorry, so Millwall. And these guys were putting in £10 million a year into the football club.
I always thought Millwall was one of those very well-run clubs, sort of a similar model to Luton Town. But you mentioned earlier about the club not wanting to lose money. A big part of the vocal fan base is, why don't you borrow money? Because you have said previously, it's all right to borrow against expected earnings in the future, like what with parachute payments, providing you can service the debt. Why do you think it is that Luton Town refused to borrow any money? Do you think it is from the lessons learned from the previous 30 years?
Well, all borrowed money from third parties has to be repaid. So I think Luton have a strategy, and that strategy last season was to spend money modestly as far as their Premier League season was going, to try not to disrupt the culture within the dressing room, because if you've got a group of players who have come through the Championship and have got the club promoted, and then all of a sudden you sign 4 or 5 Carlos Kickaballs who are on substantially more money than the existing squad, then that can have a negative impact as far as the progress of the club is concerned. They made some modest acquisitions. I think at the back of the mind, Gary Sweet and the rest of the team took the view that we're going to get £100 million in TV money this season. We're going to get £41 million in 24-25 in parachute payments. Worst case scenario, if the club goes down, and we'll get another 33 million in 25-26. So we're going to allocate a proportion of that to wages and transfer fees, and we're also going to allocate a proportion of that to infrastructure with a view to creating a situation for Luton Town where they will have a stadium which generates substantial revenues, both on match days and non-match days, which will allow them, should they be relegated, to become more competitive on a longer-term basis. You can put all of you. We've seen clubs get promoted to the Premier League, spend all of the money. It hasn't worked out, and then they're on the back burner with players who are back in the Championship who aren't good enough for the Premier League. So therefore, they stick in the Championship. Do you remember? I know this is good for you. Do you remember Nikola Zigic at Birmingham?
Massive guy.
Massive, 6'7". They signed him in January with a view of him keeping them up in the Premier League. Didn't work out. He was on a 3.5-year contract, 6 months in the Premier League, 3 years being an okay player in the Championship on Premier League wages because nobody else was willing to match that. So I think I applaud Luton because they've not gone down that route. And I think that the owners have got a longer term vision for the club in terms of, if we've got a stadium which will hold, you know the details, but say 20,000 people. It's got facilities which are attractive to commercial partners and hospitality. We can utilise the facilities for conferencing, for meetings, for events. Then we look at it through a business lens. And I know as fans we don't want that. As a fan, I want to go and spend £20 million on a new centre forward, but deep down I probably know it would be far better if I had a better ground to go to. And I thought you were unlucky last season. I was there when Brighton played at Kenilworth Road, And not only did you slaughter us, I think 4-0 flattered Brighton.
Yeah, it did. That game was absolutely sensational. I feel it gave Rob Edwards and the team sort of a full storm of this is how we're going to play. We're not going to deviate from this plan. Like he felt it clicked, but unfortunately it got figured out in the second half of Newcastle, and then we just kept flogging that dead horse for the remainder of the season. But on your last point, talking about the Premier League and the financial rewards and the parachute payments, what sort of changes do you perceive have happened at the club behind the scenes in terms of finances, the recruitment, the staffing? What can Luton Town realistically do in the future within the strict confines of how we operate?
I think what you have to do is to acknowledge where you are in terms of your ability to be competitive, and you can't be bigger than some of the clubs. Sunderland have got a 50,000 capacity stadium. You've got a lot of big hitters in the Championship. So, in my view, the strategy at Luton Town is don't be bigger, be smarter. And again, referencing Sunderland Till I Die, I don't know whether you watched that particular programme. They were not smarter, the people in charge, and the Will Grigg transfer saga was one of the classic moments of documentary style television on how ego and vanity can overrule common sense. And I don't see that in the people who are running Luton. Now, that can be frustrating from a fan's point of view because you get giddy. And I think the owners at Sunderland, and I've been on a few panels with Charlie Methven, and Charlie is good company. I think it's fair to say. I think we agree to disagree on a fair few topics, but he's a very entertaining guy, and sometimes that can work for you, and sometimes that can work against you. I think on transfer deadline day, it probably works against you.
Yeah, that was an absolute farce. And everyone around them was saying he is not worth a penny more than X amount. And then they ended up paying double what he wasn't worth more of. He absolutely flopped to Sunderland. It was absolute carnage TV. It was wonderful to watch. So entertaining. Okay, but now I'm going to ask about some bad things. So what do you think, if anything, Luton Town get wrong? It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the wages here. They were paying average wages based on my calculations. Now, my calculations are very sort of finger in the wind, but I felt that their wage level in the first couple of years in the Championship was around about 6, 7, 8 grand a week. Wasn't particularly competitive, but it was enough to keep them up. It was certainly within their budget range. I think there's a case for saying, have they been too slow with regards to Luton 2020 or Luton 2030 in terms of the development of the new stadium? But I also have to admit that I don't know enough about the intricacies of the negotiations, presumably with the local council, in terms of finding an appropriate site or redeveloping Kenilworth Road. As somebody that knows nothing about architecture, I don't see how you can redevelop Kenilworth Road, given where it is.
It's very tight. All the houses built around it. It's impossible.
Yeah. So I think it's a case of that would have to be an issue. I'm sure behind the scenes that they're giving it 24/7. Perhaps the communication side of things, therefore, could be something which could be addressed. They just like to get on with things and don't want to be in the spotlight. And I understand the logic behind that. Sometimes having a closer liaison in terms of updating fans on a regular basis, that's something that could take place. And certainly when I've seen those clubs which have done that, I'm really friendly with Andy Holt at Accrington Stanley. Andy's a combative individual, to put it mildly. But to be fair, the first time we ever met was after I'd been very, very mildly critical of something that Accrington had done. And he contacted me and he says, right, when are you next in Manchester? I said, well, I'm such and such a date. He says, right, I want to meet you. And he turned up. Am I allowed to swear?
Of course.
Okay.
Let it rip.
He turned up and I just said I felt that they could be more transparent. And also this is one of the criticisms I've had with Gary Sweets, to be fair, in respect of Luton, that I think they could show more information. And he turned up to me with 2 carrier bags and he says, there's the fucking accounts. You go and look at them now. And since then, we've been great friends.
That is, that's fantastic. From his Twitter feed, he does seem exactly that type of character. Look, I'm not asking for transparency from Gary Sweet in the vein of Darren McAntony or Andy Holt, going on Twitter rants and, a thread every morning that finishes with "Good morning, by the way." I'm not looking for that. But you hit the nail on the head in terms of the transparency, the communication regarding the new stadium. And it has irked a lot of Luton Town fans. Another thing that has irked Luton Town fans, and it's something that you can definitely shine a light on, it's regards to the fact that Luton Town are, as of recording, Luton Town have not released a kit for this season. Not one. There are going to be 3. Not one has been released. A lot of fans have speculated maybe we're moving away from Umbro, maybe we're not, maybe we're staying. But at the same time, there is this thought that with Umbro, we're getting the shitty end of the stick. Perhaps there are tiers to kit manufacturer partnerships, and maybe with these tiers you get preferences over other clubs, or you get shoved right to the back of the queue. If so, if there is this Illuminati tiered mechanism to Umbro and other kit manufacturer deals, why would it benefit Luton Town to do this?
Yeah, well, first of all, with regards to kits, I've got to know some kit manufacturers. I know how much it costs to produce a kit, and there is a big gap between production costs and the retail price. If you take the likes of, and people will say, well, why can't we go for Nike or Adidas or something like that? If you do that as Luton Town, you will be tier 4. So tier 1 for Nike will be England, Brazil, Liverpool, Barcelona, and then you drop down to tier 2. And probably Chelsea there. Brighton are perhaps a tier 2 or a tier 3 because they are a Premier League club, but they're only going to Liverpool will sell more Nike kits in a month than Brighton will sell in a year.
Oh, no, not in Japan. In Japan, like with Mitoma, you'll be selling out, won't you?
Well, I believe that there's a shortage of number 2s in Tokyo because Brighton have just been on tour in Japan. And they ran out of number 2s to go with Mitoma, which I thought a bit of forward planning would have helped there. But Japan's actually a very small market. You've got to look at things on a global scale, and Liverpool are the most popular club as far as the Premier League is concerned in the USA, which is the Premier League's second biggest market now. So the danger of perhaps going with an alternative manufacturer is that you might get a bespoke first team kit, but your away kit and your third kit will be off the shelf. And just with a Luton, it'll be a bog standard shirt with a Luton Town badge on, and you can buy that shirt for £10. You can go and buy the badge yourself for 3 or 4 quid. If you want to sew them on, you get exactly the same quality of product. So in terms of the delay, I think you're absolutely right. It's more of a communication issue. We're practically into August. There's no need for the clubs to show the kit. But presumably, have you had some pre-season friendlies?
Yeah, we played them in last season's kit. We have one pre-season friendly remaining against Celta Vigo. The idea going around is that we're going to announce it the morning of and then play in them. But who knows? Who knows?
Clubs like to create a mystique when it comes to kit launch. And clearly, and to be fair, an awful lot of work tends to go into the launch. So you've got the press office, you've got the photographers, you've got the players who are already sat in the kit, and they'll be thinking about some sort of snazzy launch logo slogan to go alongside it. And they are incredibly protective, but again, a little bit of forewarning. We're playing Celta Vigo. Put your shirt on it, something like that. Then that will sell more. Sell a few more tickets, and people will be turning up. So I don't see the benefit, although perhaps they feel that merchandise sales, compared to the amount of money they're going to receive from parachute payments and the EFL new TV deal, is not consequential enough to warrant a lot of diversion of their resource. But why not just have a countdown, on the Luton Town website, new kit launched in 8 days, 23 hours, 15 minutes, and just you can do that, and you give away a couple of teasers. That's what clubs have historically done. I think that you're probably right, that they're shooting themselves in the foot a bit.
It's interesting, actually, because if you go on the Luton Town website under kit sizing, they actually have the Puma sizing guide up there. They don't have the Umbro sizing, it's the Puma sizing, and Puma were our previous kit manufacturer. So I know it's so confusing. You mentioned the EFL TV deal, so how much more will that benefit Luton Town in addition to the parachute payments?
Not a huge amount, because if we take a look at clubs in the Championship, they get around about £8 million a season from a combination of what we refer to as solidarity payments, which is money paid to EFL clubs who are not in receipt of parachute payments. So therefore you'll lose out on that. And then the EFL deal itself, which is probably worth another £3 million.
That's not much.
No.
Yeah. That's really not good. Oh, crikey. Yeah.
So together you're normally looking at around about £8 million. It'll probably be a wee bit more this season, because we've got the launch of the new TV deal as far as the EFL is concerned, and the EFL have also just signed a deal with, I think it's CBS in the United States, which is for the vast majority of EFL matches to be made available. But I've got to be honest, they're only really interested in Wrexham and Birmingham.
And not Leeds. Leeds are massive, aren't they?
Leeds will get some traction, but I think the reason why that deal was signed was due to the success of the Welcome to Wrexham show.
Yeah,
Leeds have got a big following. I don't think America, though, is one of their big markets. They're big in Australia. They're big in Cyprus, for reasons I can't quite fathom out. But we've all got
so random.
We've all got our crosses to bear.
Yeah, or maybe Wayne Rooney's Plymouth Argyle will be massive in the US as well. Maybe.
Perhaps. I'm not sure that Rooney Mania is as big as we think.
Yeah, not as big as David Beckham anyway.
No.
I have a question about the previous 30 years. So we discussed it before. Luton have had a lot of trouble between 98 and 2008 with 3 administrations and a total of 40 points deducted. I don't know if you were following football financials back then. I think you were still in liquidations, maybe. How severe were those times for Luton Town from a financial perspective?
I think from an existential point of view, in terms of the danger of the club ceasing to exist, it shouldn't have. If it was any other business, it wouldn't be in existence. So therefore, it comes down to the unique place that football plays in society, community, however you want to describe it. You Ollie, you are Luton Town till you die. It's part of your identity, and it's that enthusiasm and that willingness from a variety of people that has kept the club alive during those very fallow years, and that can be also levelled at many other clubs as well. Brighton were homeless. We were playing in Gillingham for 2 years, and then an absolutely awful athletics track for a decade. You wouldn't do that for any other business. You say let's just sack it off and let's go down the pub.
Fold
on a Saturday afternoon.
Just fold it and then let's move on.
Just fold it. You'll live. But I know. I lived in Manchester for 40 years, and when the issues in respect of Bury were taking place, I went along to Bury Town Hall on a few occasions to listen to the debate. And okay, I know a wee bit about finance and football, but I tended to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to be taking sides. And when the club went out of existence again, I sort of got to know a few people, and listening to them was a very humbling experience. We glibly say that football is the most important of the unimportant things in life, but it is so much the most important of those things. And talking to people who I got to know, saying, what's it like? And they say, well, when it's international weekend and you're in the Premier League or the Championship and you've got nothing to do, can you imagine that for 52 Saturdays a year? I go, oh my God, it's horrible. I hate international breaks. I just sort of, I know my wife's going to get me to do things for a start, which I don't particularly want to do. But I'm sort of wondering what is my purpose this particular weekend. I've got no football. Football is the hook on which we hang our whole weekend as a football fan. And it is important. And I was fortunate enough to have a ticket for the final in Berlin to go and see England play Spain. And of course I wanted England to win. But watching England playing a qualifier against Macedonia on a Saturday when I could be going to a Premier League match or a Championship club match or wherever Brighton happened to be at the time was always 1,000 times more important. So I think due to going back to your original question, I think it came down to individuals and groups of people who didn't want to be in a situation where Bury fans have been for a few years, and what's happening at Bury at present is just as bad. I don't know how whether you're following what's happening on social media, but it's like Brexit. There are two factions. There's no meeting ground. They're abusing each other. They're abusing the players. They're abusing the owners at matches away. It's a horrible environment, and it's such a tragedy. I know from living up north what happened during the miners' strike in the 1980s, and I'm not sort of trying to sort of become a social anthropologist or anything like this, but communities became torn apart because people were taking one side of the debate or another. So that would have been a potential issue had Luton ceased to exist. And also, you go through a grievance process. It is like losing somebody that you love, because if you take your football club away from you, that's when you realise just how much it means to you. Because I've always maintained, if I look at the top 10 greatest moments of my life, 6 of them involve football.
I'll never tell my wife, so I got 2 kids, but Luton Town getting promoted to the Premier League. I won't say in a recorded situation where that places in the top 4 or top 5, but
or top 1.
It's pretty high. I'll just say that much. But Kieran, are you ready to play some Hatter or Lower?
Oh yes, this sounds suitably nuts.
Right, I'm going to tell you the rules right now. Hatter or Lower is powered by Hatter's Heritage, a website that does the important job of preserving the history of our club. They always need volunteers and patrons, and you can check them out at hattersheritage.co.uk or get in touch by Googling Hatter's Heritage. It's a bit different this week, though. Will from Luton Facts and Figures has got the name and appearance totals for 10 Hatters who played for Kieran's beloved Brighton. And then I ask, Player A, has he played more for Luton or Brighton?
Oh, lordy.
The contender then has to guess which team the player made more appearances for and try and get as high up in our leaderboard as possible. It's now time to play Hatter or Lower, and this week's contender is Kieran Maguire.
That's me.
How are the nerves?
To try to put it in context, 2 months ago, when we had the previous government, I had to go to the Houses of Parliament and sit before a dozen MPs who were grilling me on football governance, and I'm more nervous now.
That's what I like to hear. Okay, so they start off easy, they get harder. Okay? Right. Let's kick this up. Matthew Upson, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
He was 1 season on loan at Brighton, so I'm going to more for Luton.
Incorrect.
Oh, no.
Matthew Upson played 61 times for Brighton.
Oh, right.
Twice for Luton.
Oh, right. Oh,
Arsenal poached him from us after 2 appearances, one of those being in the Anglo-Italian Cup.
Very nice guy, by the way. Very nice guy.
That's what I've heard. Right, next question. Steve Foster, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
More for Brighton, because he had 2 spells at the club when we swapped him for Tony Grealish. So, yeah, I'm going for more for Brighton.
Correct! Steve Foster played 332 times for Brighton and 212 times for Luton Town.
Wow, as many as that. Incredible.
Yeah, well, at Luton, he was there for 6 or 7 seasons.
Right.
Yeah, lifted our only silverware.
Yes, I remember that. Yes,
Tremendous captain.
Cheering you on that day.
That's wonderful. Right, Tony Grealish. Did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
He was that swap deal. He captained us in the FA Cup final in 1983. I'm going to go more for Luton.
Incorrect. Tony Grealish played 121 times for Brighton, 86 times for Luton.
Okay.
He was
sadly no longer with us.
Yeah, I know. Gone way too soon. Paddy Grealish.
Yeah.
Right. Next question.
Okay.
Brian Horton, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
I'm going to go more for Brighton.
Correct!
Right.
Brian Horton played 252 times for Brighton, 132 times for Luton. Here we go.
Player.
Up and running.
Great player.
Midfield maestro.
Yeah, hugely underrated and a real leader. That was a proper captain.
So true. So true. Right. Don Shanks. Did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
I remember Don Shanks playing for Brighton in the old First Division. And the most exciting thing that happened to him was when George Best stole his girlfriend. Which George Best, to be fair, had a habit of doing.
Yeah.
We signed him from QPR. I'm going to go Brighton.
Incorrect. Don Shanks played 54 times for Brighton.
Okay.
110 times for Luton Town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that before or after he was at Brighton? Was it?
I think after Brighton.
Okay, cool.
Right. Kurt Nogan, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
Kurt Nogan. He's the guy that did the runner, didn't he, from a curry house?
Oh, I don't know.
He was absolutely brilliant for Brighton. I'm going to go Brighton.
Correct. Kurt Nogan played 120 times for Brighton, 39 times for Luton Town.
Yeah. I think it was we sold him to. I think we sold him to Burnley And then this is the sort of the stuff of internet legend that he was in a curry house in Burnley and he did a runner, wouldn't pay the bill. But I don't know how true that is. On his day, one of those players who just scored goals, but he had a fantastic one season for us and then sort of dropped off the radar. And I seem to remember him playing for you in the League Cup against Liverpool or something. Was that right?
Yeah, maybe years ago. He wasn't very good for us. We had him and his brother Lee,
right,
but about a decade apart. So we had Lee Nogan towards the beginning of the 90s. He was all right. Youth team play. He was all right. Kurt Nogan was absolute toilet for Luton Town, though.
Yeah.
Right. More modern player.
Oh.
Kazenga Luuga. Did he play more for Brighton or Luton?
Great player, Kaz. I'm going to go Brighton. For me, he was brilliant for us for a long time.
Correct. Kazenga Luuga played 183 times for Brighton, 87 times for Luton Town. Quite a big difference.
Yes.
And not such a spectacular player now. Darren Curry. Did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
I've taught Darren.
Really?
Yeah, I've taught him. Yeah. I think he's now at Southend on the coaching team. I taught him when he was doing his diploma at the League Managers Association. I'm going to go Luton because he was only with us, I think, for half a season.
Well, you are correct, but he wasn't with us for much longer than that. He played 23 times for Brighton and 38 times for Luton.
Yeah, had a brilliant left foot. It was about as fast as my wheelie bin, but he just had a magnificent left foot.
He wasn't as good as his uncle Tony, though.
Nowhere near. It was though.
Right. Danny Wilson, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
Right. He was 4 seasons at Brighton, so he would have played around about 160 games. He was very rarely injured, but I think he was longer at Luton, so I'm going to go Luton.
Incorrect. Danny Wilson played 155 times for Brighton, so you weren't too far off. 142 times for Luton.
Close.
It's very close.
Yeah.
I did say they get harder as they go on. The final questions, so let's raise the roof.
Right.
Lloyd Owusu, did he play more for Luton or Brighton?
I'm going to go Luton.
Correct. Lloyd Owusu played 14 times for Brighton and he played 15 times for Luton.
He was a good lad, Big Lloyd, as well. I remember the year we were supposed to get relegated to League Two and he came along again, sort of second half of the season and just changed things around. And then I think he went off to Australia. I'm pretty certain.
He went everywhere.
Brighton offered him a contract and he went to Australia.
Yeah, he had more clubs than Tiger Woods.
Yes.
He's gone around. He really has. But you've done so well here. 6 out of 10.
Right.
You're upper mid-table. Well, you're just above mid-table.
I'll take that.
You're in great company here. You're sitting on 6 points with Nick Owen, former Luton Town player Marvin Johnson, current Luton Town chairman David Wilkinson. You're in good company. You should be happy.
That sounds like a good dinner party to me.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Kieran. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, Ollie, and I hope you get to see your kit sooner rather than later.
I'm not holding my breath. I'd pass out. If you've enjoyed this interview from the Walk Podcast, please like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube. Follow across all our socials. Come on, you Hatters.